Hey there guys, what's going on? I've made a video very similar to this one in the past, but I thought I'd take a revisit as that video is a little bit outdated, and some of the tips that I gave in the past weren't exactly accurate. Anyway, today I am going to be discussing how to get the most out of OBS Studio, also known as OBS multi-platform. I mostly use OBS to stream, as it is for me the easiest and most effective way at producing a quality stream. And we'll talk about that in a separate video, but today we are going to be discussing the settings for making high quality local recordings, especially if you're after 1080p 60 FPS recordings. But before I get into this, obviously not everyone is going to have a system that's capable of both recording content at 1080 and 60 FPS. I will discuss some alternatives to help out some of you that don't have the best hardware. Right, so let us get into looking at this window that we've got here. Basically, this can look quite confronting to someone who's only used the older versions of OBS, or for new users entirely. I'll explain what we've got going on here. The Scenes tab is basically a collection of your scenes, and a scene is essentially a grouping of sources, which is the next tab here. A source is basically anything that you want to appear on screen, whether that be gameplay, face cams, borders for your face cam, it's basically anything you want. So you can pretty much add anything you want in here by right-clicking and going Add. You've got a whole list of different options that you can add in here, and we'll talk about some of those later, but some of the important ones are window capture, video capture device, media source, game capture, and so on. But yeah, we'll talk about most of those later. These are mostly self-explanatory and for the most part pretty easy to use, but we will get back to these a little bit later once we've set up our recording settings. Right, so diving straight into our settings menu, and again, some of these settings and names might be and sound a little bit confusing or confronting when the first time you use them, but I will tell you all the important things that you need to look at, and you can mess around with some of these settings for yourself. To start us off, there isn't really anything that you need to worry about in the general tab. The only thing that would be changing is the theme. So you can change it default, dark, arachne, apparently, which is a little bit different. I use default. It's just what I prefer. Nothing special about the general tab from what I can tell. We won't be covering the stream tab in this video, so we'll skip past that. So the output tab is our big boy, our best friend, our bread and butter for making juicy YouTube content. So you change the output mode at the top from simple to advanced to get a setting or a settings menu that looks like mine here. And we want to start adjusting settings in the recording tab rather than the streaming one. The streaming one's only for live streaming, so we'll go to the recording tab to start us off. Okay, we want our type to be standard rather than custom output. And you want to set your recording path. This is basically where the file is recorded to, so this is where you're getting it saved later on, so definitely put it somewhere that you're not going to lose it or you'll remember where you find it. I do think it does default to your video folder, so I would suggest moving that, especially if your videos folder is on your other hard drive. So say you have an SSD, your video folder will be on that. And if it saves to that hard drive in particular, well, it'll get filled up pretty quickly, especially with the larger recording file size. Anyway, the recording format is pretty much up to you. It basically, you have a whole different choice, so FLV, MP4, MOV, MKV, TS, and M3U8. And like I said, this is really up to you. File types like FLV don't support multiple audio tracks. So basically, if you want to include multiple audio tracks, which will end up making your video easier to edit later on, this is something you want to include. However, MP4, as according to this orange text down here, recordings saved to MP4 will be unrecoverable if the file cannot be finalized, e.g. as a result of split screen deaths and power losses. So essentially, if you are worried about your computer crashing or overheating or stuff like that, or there's might be a power outage, that's when you wouldn't record in MP4. Most of the time you're going to be able to complete a recording session, and if you are most likely be able to complete the recording session, you should go with MP4. You get the multiple audio tracks, and it's just a nice comfortable format that most video editing software is comfortable with using. And it even gives you a nice little alternative if you still want to use multiple audio tracks. So it actually says here, if you want to record multiple audio tracks, consider using MKV and remux the recording to MP4 after it is finished, which is actually kind of easy to do. It's not something that I've ever used before, but for example, if you don't want to use MP4 but you still want multiple audio tracks, you can use the file type MKV and then convert the file over to an MP4 once you're finished. You want to set your encoder to NVENC if you have an NVIDIA graphics card. This basically means that your graphics card will do all of the encoding, reducing the strain on your CPU, which will provide you with some crispy looking recordings rather than really putting some pressure or some strain on your CPU, which can make your recordings end up looking choppy. And it can also affect your actual gameplay, so the recording might look okay, but the game you're trying to play might look a little bit choppy to you. It might come out in the recording okay, but yeah, you might have a hard time actually playing the game properly if the recording's actually choppy and putting strain on your CPU. And if you don't have an NVIDIA graphics card, you can use the X264, but you want to have a pretty decent processor for that. Here are some of the settings in this part down here that you can actually use to reduce some of the strain on your PC. Rescale output is what the file will be downscaled to if you choose to do so. So if, for example, you only want to have your videos be recorded in 720, which you can see here, 1280 by 720, you can set that to that. So if you want to choose to have a low quality recording because your PC might not be able to handle it, well then go for that. I'm going to stick with the 1080 for the time being because my PC can obviously handle it and I don't usually have any problems with these settings, so that's usually what I go with. We want to ignore the custom muxer settings. Rate control is important along with bitrate. These two options will actually impact how choppy or grainy your footage can end up looking. Honestly, I've not really given a lot of these settings a good look. I use CBR, which is constant bitrate. So you can mess around with these other settings. VBR is variable bitrate, and lossless basically records it for what it is, which makes your file sizes absolutely enormous. Yeah, and as I mentioned, changing these settings will also impact the file size. If you want exact quality of your game to appear in your recording, you can want to set your rate control to lossless. This will get you the absolute finest looking video that you can get, but your file size will be huge and it'll take a while to upload, edit, stuff like that. So if you want to just keep a normal file size, just go with constant bitrate. And bitrate, as I mentioned before, is also very, very important. You want this to be as high as it can be without causing your PC problems with stuttering or lag. So basically this number that you want to pick is up to you. Honestly, I have mine set to 30,000 and I want as high a quality as I can get with the videos when I record with OBS. And again, this is really up to you. Honestly, 20,000 is a good setting. I've used that with my older laptop. You can go higher or lower around there. I sit at 30,000, but yeah, you can mess around with the numbers and see what works best for you. Just do a couple of test recordings, see what bitrate number you want to sit at, and yeah. Like I mentioned, I was actually able to set at about 20,000 with my old laptop that I used to make all my videos with that, and it seemed to be a good number to sit at. I honestly didn't prefer using OBS to record. I was more interested in using Shadowplay, but OBS is a good software to use with a reasonably strong PC. So that's always something to look into. Preset is also something that you can use to change the impact on your PC. I use Blu-ray as that's what works best for me, and that increases the quality as far as I know. But you can also use high performance if your PC is struggling. This will make the footage look a little bit grainier and a little bit less quality and crisp, and it won't make the best videos you can make, but it will reduce the impact on your PC. And high quality is similar to Blu-ray, but I think Blu-ray is the highest option that you can get. Anyway, once you've changed that, make sure you click apply on all these settings after you mess around with them, otherwise they won't stick. Going into the audio tab, we don't really need to worry about anything here. Moving on to the other audio tab. Essentially, I haven't messed around with a lot of these settings. You can set the sample rate to 48 kilohertz or 44.1. I honestly don't think this makes a great deal of difference unless you're a massive audiophile and you love hearing and you can actually pick up the different qualities in the bitrate, stuff like that. Not something that I'm massively capable of doing or massively interested in either. So I usually just stick with 48 kilohertz. But this is also where you set up your different devices to listen and play and record your sound that you want to get. So your desktop audio device is just the headset you're going to use, and the mic auxiliary audio device is your microphone. The video tab is a nice short one, but it's also very important. This is where you set your video resolutions and your FPS. Essentially, you want your base resolution to be the resolution of your monitor. In this case, mine is a 1920 by 1080p monitor. So you want the base resolution set to whatever your monitor is. This obviously has two different options. I can even set this to 720 if I was to feel so inclined. And the output scaled resolution is what the video will be encoded down into. So if your PC does end up struggling, you can set this to say 720 and you'll end up producing a 720 recording. This will reduce some of the input on your PC and make it a little bit less taxing, so your recordings and while you're recording isn't affected as much as it would be if your PC was struggling doing 1080. I normally leave this on 1080 because that's the resolution I want the video to come out as. So normally I don't have any problems with that. Also the downscale filter. This is only, as far as I know, this is only useful if you are downscaling. So if you wanted to downscale something, you want either bicubic or Lanczos. basically that affects the quality of the downscaling. So Lanczos will get you the absolute best quality downscaling that you can get. Bicubic is somewhere in the middle, and bilinear will make it fast, but it'll be blurry if you are downscaling it. I usually sit at Lanczos, but I've never had a problem with the bicubic option either. And obviously the common FPS values are where you can change your FPS that the video outputs at. So you can change this. I usually use common FPS, as basically it's very simple. You just go into this slide down menu, pick your options. Basically, if you want 60, go 60. If your PC can handle 60, then you can go 60. But if it can't, unfortunately, you can still use 30. 30 is a fine standard for YouTube. They obviously have the 60 FPS players at the moment, and 30 has been slightly below standard. It was the standard beforehand, but yeah, 30 FPS videos are still very, very watchable. So you can use that if you are struggling with the 60 FPS options. In the Hotkeys tab, you can set up various hotkeys like stop and start recording. Most of these are something that you want to get into if you get involved in it. Like if you get involved in using OBS a lot more, you can set a lot of different things here to make your recordings or your streams as high quality as you want to be. By just messing around with a couple of hotkeys, you can add different transitions, stop recording, stop streaming, start streaming, all these other things with just a tap of a key rather than having to go into the settings menu, change all the things, and it just kind of adds more of a streamlined process when you've got hotkeys running. It's nothing too big of a deal. I usually don't use hotkeys because I have the OBS window open on my other monitor, so I usually don't have too much of a problem with that. And there also isn't a lot to do in the advanced tab. I don't even know what most of these settings and options even mean. So after we've got our settings, you're probably wondering, how do I set up a recording? Basically, you want to right click, or you want to clear off any sources that you have just to start fresh. You want to right click the sources tab, and you want to put in a source. If you're, say, for example, recording a game, well, the ones that I'd recommend basically include window capture. Video capture is obviously your webcam. Game capture enables you to capture a full screen application, particularly a video game that you're trying to play or record at the same time. Very useful for games. Sometimes it doesn't lock on or pick specifically the right game, depending on the game, your PC. It's sometimes it doesn't pick up certain games. That's why you can use window capture instead. Display capture is also a good one if you're trying to record something on your monitor or your desktop. So like I am right now, I'm not using it. I'm not using OBS to record this. I'm using something else a little bit easier. So yeah, if you want to capture something on your monitor, you can just set this to display capture, which we will do here. And you can see this is the window that I've got going on at the moment. And yes, as I mentioned already, you can basically set up game capture to capture any full screen application. This is one of the important things that you got going on here. So say if you have Overwatch open and you want to record some Overwatch, you have Overwatch running in the background, you set up OBS to pick up any full screen application, and it will pick up Overwatch. You can also obviously set this to capture a specific window, so you can tell it which window to capture, or you can capture foreground window with a hotkey. That's pretty much up to you. I usually leave it on the capture of any full screen application. It usually does the job for me, but if you want to be specific, you can be specific with it. And if you do want to include a Facecam in your videos, as I mentioned, that is the video capture device option. That's that there. Hey, what's going on? So basically you can just adjust these settings as you will. Basically you can set up a face cam, green screen, all sorts of things. That's what I've got there behind me. Obviously it is a green screen, and we will get rid of that. You don't need to see any more of my face. Sweet face reveal. And obviously you can always adjust any of these settings so you look nice and shiny in your recording. And that's pretty much everything you need to know about local recording with OBS Studio. It is pretty simple, but it does look a little bit intimidating at first. I obviously struggled when I opened this. I looked at it and it looked very confusing. It doesn't look exactly the same as the old OBS if you've used that one before. It's a little bit intimidating to use first, but once you watch videos like this, or you get tips from your friends and stuff like that, you do end up being very confident with actually how to use this. So hopefully I did clear up any questions that you might have had about making sweet recordings of your own. Feel free to mess around with the settings that I've suggested and given you. It might give you better results for your personal system. This is just what works for me. Anyway, thank you very much for watching this one. If you enjoyed it or I helped you out in any way, make sure you do leave a like and do subscribe if you are new around here. This has been Luke from Less Than Average Gaming, and I hope you guys have an above average day, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye! Somebody once told me the world